The clouds are really beautiful again today. In a different way, they're wispier. But I like how amorphous they are. These ones I think are not cumulonimbus, just cumulus. Oh, someone's texting me that I shouldn't be texting. And is that better than somebody that you should be texting not texting you? Let's check in. How are you feeling today in your body? Is there any tightness anywhere? Is there any pain? Right now, my legs have been hurting a lot lately. Right now, my legs hurt. My lower legs specifically, more so. And I feel a little bit of chest tightness. Yeah, it's more going into my lower belly. I'm just moved, so I don't have my proper setup here. I want you to be able to see more of my body. But this will have to do for now. Oh, goodness. Art. Is it all art? Sometimes when I think about the universe on the grandest existential scale, I think that the only way that you can properly interpret, or not properly interpret, let me be careful with my words. I think a useful way for me as an artist to interpret the grandest meaning of life, if you're into that sort of thing, is by thinking of it as art, as something that exists purely for the experience of itself. That when you go out as far as possible, it cannot possibly exist for any other reason than its own existence. But many people, sociologists, would think that think of art through a practical lens of how it is impacting society. So that doesn't work for a lot of people. But as somebody who is creating non-functional art objects, it resonates with me sometimes. Of course, not as a definitive endpoint, but as a framework of which to think about life in. You can see skyscrapers here. Steel was really big for construction. I was listening to somebody saying, who was saying that the 20s, somebody on here was saying that the 20s were a huge time, like somebody born, I guess around that time, like maybe 1910 or 1915, was, I'm getting all my dates wrong. Okay, I'm not going to stress it too much. around that time, the first photographs were happening, were getting popularized. So you would have seen, if you were born then, you would have seen the first photograph, and then all the way up until like radio, and then you have a telephone in your house. Anyways, I was not saying this, somebody else was saying this. Why was I thinking about that? Oh, yes, the invention of, not invention of steel, but, well, was steel invented? Is it? Anyway. This curtain is like, you can't see, it's like really frayed. But it keeps out a nice amount of light. I'm still getting used to this room. I'm going to make a mock-up of it to scale in the software that I use called Magic Voxel. I do 2 voxels to 1 inch. And that allows me to get a really great fidelity of detail that is really practical, where like a centimeter is too small. Like things that we use don't typically, like, you don't need to get that amount of detail if you're just looking at a room for it to feel real. And then the rendering, like it's my computer fries. But most things that you can just see when you go into a room fit at a 1/2 inch scale. So I found that to be really practical. It's always the why question that bogs me down. Why am I doing this? Why are we here? When let's just say, like, let's just assume we know the answer already. We know why we're here. It's this. But I suppose I don't know why. There is like some reason I feel that I'm doing these YouTube videos that has not been made clear to me yet. And it's hard to sit in the not knowing. It makes my mind go into these little eddies that are hard to, that take my mind somewhere that I feel is off track, but I suppose it's not off track, because whatever I'm doing is the track. And I posted a video that was me channeling. And it's not to say channeling in quotes as though I don't believe in it or that I think people are lying, but that if there is another entity and it comes into my body, then I don't feel like Morgan Prescott doesn't necessarily feel that that entity is not of myself. That the only way that I can usefully understand who is myself and who is not is who is able to be inside of my body. Like my mind. Not my mind, but who is able to inhabit this vessel. So if you're inhabiting this vessel, I think it makes sense to call you Morgan. I don't find there to be a, but maybe people channel in order to preserve a distinction because they actually feel like they couldn't hold that energy all the time. But I'm not sure how much of me can really hold on. Most of the time when I pray, it's to let go, that something else can take over. So anything that is coming in here to this vessel, it can stay. For now, at least, this is how I feel. I've been thinking a lot about I've been embodying a lot, just like this idea of evil. What does it mean to be evil? Processing a lot of guilt and shame along with it. And I thought of making a video because I was relating it originally a lot to femininity, that in a patriarchal, masculine dominated society that uses Christian morality, where evil is superior to good, good is superior to evil. There's like a hierarchical approach, as opposed to something like Buddhism, which poses them as in equal forces in opposition to each other, not evil, but good and bad. Of course, I'm using very simplistic language here. Femininity is posed as, in this Christian paradigm, the evil, the inferior, that can basically be the masculines. You can think of it as the Jungian, like, shadow self. Like, every man has this, like, Christian, I'm talking about the society that I was raised in. Even though we say that we're kind of officially atheistic, like there's a separation of church and state, at least where I live. Our culture is heavily Christian dominated, and our atheists are still using Christian morality on a very core level to base their lives off of. And so there's this kind of, in every man, this kind of feminine shadow alter ego you can think of, that holds all of the oppositional qualities that he feels is bad to embody, is evil to embody. And then I was thinking about this and thinking about how women do this as well, that if one is to say, in a binary gendered system, and in a predominantly heterosexual, predominantly binary gendered system, I am one half of this. I am a man or I am a woman, and I have a relation with the other. The man is inherently outside of the self, and that in a large part is what it means to be a woman. Same with a man. That the woman is inherently outside of himself, and that's what it means to be a man. So these things are being put in opposition and relation to each other, like magnets that are pulled and pushed simultaneously. That the shadow self, the idea of the enemy, and I'll link it below. There's a great professor on here who does a lot of explanations of Jung and the shadow self and the relationship to the enemy, which is where I'm talking about this from. I need to read Jung. I know I need to read Jung. Look, I'm 21. I'm just talking off the cuff. Like, I'm not trying to be some, like, academic. I'm just having fun. So don't come for me. So, these opposing aspects, masculinity, femininity, man, woman, of course, all of us inhabit these qualities in ourselves spiritually, because you can't have a conceptualization of the other without taking the other into yourself, and we're beings that are constantly recycling and consuming the other in order to make the self. You can think of eating is the most very literal and basic way that we do this. So anyway, it's you can actually think of these ideas about the enemy and the other as relating really heavily to sexual dynamics between, on a societal level, between men and women. Uh, and of course, this is not to say that anyone who isn't a man or isn't a woman, and anyone who isn't heterosexual, doesn't relate to these. It's just that our relation to these things is going to be like a sub in relation to the wider societal dynamics that are at play, in which I think these opposing forces are quite dominant, which I think is a beautiful thing, and I love. I love being a man and a woman. I have no interest in getting rid of the categories, other than for where they become objects of political control. So why was I talking about this? Well, okay, not why, but was there somewhere else that I wanted to go with that thought? I wanted to. I was talking about embodying this idea of evil and how I was suggesting to a man in my life that it is a very easy access into the shadow self for men. I think for women it's more complicated because we live in a society that typically upholds masculinity as being good. That women have embodied the masculine time and time again, and it has been seen as a positive thing, where their inherent femininity is still demonized, and so there's a more complicated relationship. But for men, it's a very easy access into the shadow self to embody the feminine aspects of the self, and whatever is attached to the feminine aspects will typically, for men, I've seen this, be whatever they think of as evil or rejected from their ego. So, do drag. Not just because it's an access into the Jungian shadow self, but because it's hot. And I like looking at men in dresses when they're being sexy about it. Don't do it for yourself. Do it for me. That's pretty much all that I think that's a good place to leave it. I will be back later with more totally, totally random things to say to you. But before we end, I wanted to come back to the body, or I want to come back to the body, and notice, I guess, if you're feeling any differently in your body than you were at the beginning of this video. Not to judge or form an opinion on, but just to notice. The pain has moved into my lower back. It's kind of shooting up my spine more. Whoa. Okay. I love you. I'm gonna try to write today. I'll see you later.